Welcome.
Okay, thank you very much. My name's Donald Clark. I'm from Scotland originally, but I've come across from England today. So my English is a bit ropey as well. I'll try and avoid my accent so that you can understand what I'm saying. I'm going to be talking about reframing education and really the impact that technology and the web has had on education over the last 20 years specifically. It's nice being back here in Berlin. I've been coming to Berlin for 20 years, attending a conference here. It's a very unique conference, like this one in many ways, called Online Educa Berlin. And it's the only conference I know you can have a workshop in the sauna, and they have this fantastic debate at the end that's a bit like a sort of cage fight where they get a lively pair of adversaries up on the stage and they really go for it. And they hold a pretty good party. I think the people in Berlin seem to specialize in parties, which I like as well. But on a serious note, I've spent all my adult life in technology and learning. And I'm going to make this claim because I think it's true that there's been more pedagogic change in the last 20 years. That's really the period over which the internet has been in existence, than the last 2,000 years, going back to Socrates. And indeed, I've written extensively on learning theory over the years and written papers on every one on the screen. But if we go back, top left, to Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle with the Lyceum and Academy, the earliest universities, right through those religious leaders who still have a massive impact on education. You know, we still have lecterns in our universities because preaching as teaching is still the normal pedagogy in universities and schools. Let's not fool ourselves into thinking things have changed that much. We had the Enlightenment with people like Rousseau that started to get interested in the learner, as it were, as opposed to just pure teaching. And then we've had oodles, lots and lots of psychological theory. We've had Marxist theory, we've had instructional theory, straightforward psychology of learning, de-schooling, instructionalists, social constructivism. 2,000 years later, though, you can still walk into a university and get the same 3 lectures a week that Plato was delivering 2,000 years ago. A school is not that dissimilar to a school that someone in Rome or Athens would have experienced. This is a bit of a puzzle since we have had lots of pedagogic theorizing. However, something very interesting happened. It really happened with Tim Berners-Lee and CERN when we had the HTML, URL, and those basic standards that gave us the World Wide Web. But really, it wasn't until about 1993, 94 when things really started to affect education and we started using this as a knowledge base. Remember, the internet was built on accessing knowledge and education. It wasn't really an e-commerce thing. And in some ways, we're going back to that. But forget about all those previous pedagogic theorists, because who are the people who are shaping pedagogy now, today? They're not educational theorists. They're actually these guys, and you'll be familiar with many of them. Tim Berners-Lee up the top there, as I say, who gave us the basic standards for all the stuff that we do at this conference. Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, the guys from Google, of course, that profoundly changed pedagogy. When search came in, things changed forever. Then we have Jimmy Wales of Wikipedia. I've just finished a long research project on Wikipedia, and believe me, every child, every student, and every teacher uses Wikipedia. The interesting thing about the research was that teachers denied the fact that they used Wikipedia and didn't allow their students to use it, but they were all using it in lesson preparation, which is an interesting contradiction in many ways. We have Jeff Bezos, who hasn't bought something on Amazon, changed the book world forever, and of course the social media, Salman Khan, who comes across with a couple of thousand of videos on mathematics and suddenly gets 1.5, 2, 3 million downloads of that stuff. This is huge. The scale is phenomenal. But even newer, over the last 3 or 4 years, are these people. And you might not recognize many of these faces because the really new kids on the block are the coders, the machine learning, and the AI people. And the people who are really producing MOOCs like Sebastian Thrun, Peter Norvig, the top 2 researchers within Google, not really academics, but they are producing high-end AI courses called MOOCs on the web. We have the guys who have started Coursera, both machine learning AI experts, and people like Hassabis, who is an academic memory theorist, but really an AI guy and a mathematician, whose company was just bought after 2 years for $400 million by Google. These are the people who are shaping the learning landscape, the way people really learn when they go home and open up their laptop or use things on their mobiles, because over the last 20 years, some astonishing things have happened. We've had all of these things in education It's not necessarily the case that many of these are used inside educational institutions, but by God, do learners use them for real when they're learning on their own. Everything from Moodle, well, you know, Wikipedia's only been around since 2001. In some countries, it is the only knowledge base in their local language. Wikipedia Zero is now taking it to 500 million people because it's free tariffed on mobiles. This is huge, this stuff. And underlying all this change isn't really the MOOC thing, it's what you may call Moops, which are massive open online pedagogies. Let me explain what I mean by this. There are some fundamental things on the internet that have changed learning forever, and they are irreversible. The first one I mentioned was search, and the famous Google, of course, but think about Google. Google must be the only big corporate that actually has an educational objective as its main mission statement, and that is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. I wish I could apply that to the universities I went to, but not really, because in England you have to pay £10,000 per year to attend and get any knowledge at all. But it was a profound pedagogic productivity shift here for everyone. Who doesn't use it daily? Who doesn't find stuff out using that mechanism? And of course, there's this sense that we don't have to remember as much as we had outsourcing memory because it's so accessible. The second big one was the hyperlink. The hyperlink really drives, it's really the sort of warp drive in the internet, and especially the warp drive of online learning. And that's because traditional learning is fairly linear. Textbooks are linear, movies, videos are linear, lectures are linear. But our brains are not linear. We do not store knowledge in a linear or alphabetic fashion. We store knowledge as a network. And therefore, bringing in network knowledge is the way you personalize learning. It was always foolish to imagine that linear presentation and linear pedagogy was right. In fact, it's always been wrong. And of course, the whole of social media is driven by links. That's the beauty of Twitter. It's not the tweet, it's the link that counts in terms of accessing knowledge. And of course, we have object hyperlinking coming along. The third great gift that the internet gave us in terms of the learning world was video. And I don't mean half-hour, one-hour TV type video, because every 12-year-old will tell you that a video only needs to be long enough to meet its objective. And that means 2 or 3 minutes for a 12-year-old. It doesn't mean an hour. So recording one-hour lectures and slamming them onto YouTube EDU makes no difference. People will not watch them because it was always a flawed pedagogy in the first place. edX's recent research on a massive use of video in their MOOC shows that actually instructional video should be 6 minutes or less. 6 minutes or less in terms of real use by real learners. And I'm not talking about primary school kids, I'm talking about adult learners here. So we've seen the causal effect that YouTube has had. In fact, YouTube is now a learning platform. You can edit your videos on YouTube, you can annotate your videos, you can create your own YouTube channel. It's like a learning platform. And who doesn't go now? I have twin boys who are 20 now. And a year ago, I noticed that they were using YouTube as their search engine as opposed to Google. Both of them are quite heavily into coding. So if you come across a problem in a game or coding, you're just as likely to go and solve that problem using YouTube because it's such a powerful feedback mechanism when you get the short video. Of course, we have the Khan Academy, TED, and MOOCs. Because YouTube showed us that less is more. The internet on the whole shows us that less is more in learning. The psychology of learning tells us that less is more. Nothing in the history of the psychology of learning says you should sit in a room for 1 hour and listen to somebody speak at you. If that happened to you in an aeroplane and you asked the question of the person next to you and they give a 1 hour reply, I think you'd want to jump out of the aeroplane. But it seems to be normal to deliver a 1 hour talk in education. It's totally and utterly bizarre. Now, there are very interesting things happening now and some good research coming now with regard to just recording lectures. Keep them short anyway. But what happens when you do record lectures? Students actually don't watch the whole lecture. They're smart. They know that you've padded it out at the beginning and the end. You've got a couple of useless jokes. They want the stuff that matters to them. So on the whole, they watch less of the lecture. And they're often stopping and rewinding, taking notes, and getting fruitful feedback from the recorded material. In many ways, the recorded material can be superior to the live material. And that's because if you have English as your second language, or German as your second language, and you're being taught in another language, then you need this stuff. You need to be able to stop. If you want to stop and access deeper knowledge, you need to be able to stop You need to stop and reflect. Do you really want to spend all that time traveling to and from institutions just to attend lectures, or spend that time fruitfully studying? There are all sorts of reasons why we should be just getting this stuff up and online. And then another underlying phenomenon that swept through the world, of course, we're talking about 1.5 billion people on Facebook, is social media. And there are all sorts of aspects of social media, of course, and the big one was Wikipedia. Wikipedia is just, I think Jimmy Wales should get the Nobel Prize for learning, to be honest, because everybody uses this damn thing. And it's not just that everything is there. The bottom line with Wikipedia is it's just the door to other knowledge. You know, if you want to know something, it's a pretty cool, predictable, nice, easy way of opening the door on any subject. And it's not the case that kids stop there or we stop there. We then go on and explore other things that are well laid out in that context. And then, of course, we have Facebook and Twitter. And any learning professional, teacher really should be using this stuff, because if you want to find things out, you want to keep up to date in your professional with the latest learning theory, build networks, productivity games, communications, you should be using social media, and most people, of course, do. If you want to find your kids, you're far more likely to find them on social media than anywhere else. And there's no reason at all why we shouldn't be folding this into the learning experience. And then the last major Moop here that the internet gave us is peer-to-peer communication. If you look at people who are doing massive open online courses, MOOCs, interestingly, around the edge of the learning experience, people very often go onto Facebook or Twitter to learn from other people and have genuine conversations, because those are the tools they're used to using every day. It emerges naturally. And of course, that whole peer-to-peer learning thing has given MOOCs their scalability. If you only have one tutor and 160,000 students, you're not going to give individual feedback. But peer-to-peer learning is the engine that drives things forward very successfully. Eric Mazur started this at Harvard, but it's gone on to do big things since. And then another one, which another gift from the internet really, is big data. Now, we have to be careful with big data in education, because it's not really big data. Big data in Google's terms is terabytes of data with hundreds of millions, if not getting up for 1 billion, 2 billion people. Actually, educational data is usually a few statistics about how many people attended the course and whether they passed or not. Actually, a lot of the data is just whether people turned up or not, bums on seats. But to measure bums on seats is measuring the wrong end of the learner. You know, how much data are we really gathering about how much people are learning? Even in our examination process, things are remarkably primitive, relying on short-term memory. We forget most of that which we enter into examination questions. But things are coming of age really quickly here. There's been about 400 million to 500 million invested in algorithmic big data type learning software in the States over the last year. So, I mean, the famous example is Target. If you've ever been to the States, then every one-horse town has a Target that sells all sorts of things. Target use big data in a very interesting way. They actually know when women are pregnant before the women tell them they're pregnant, because women's habits change slightly. They start buying goods which have less additives and so on. That is an amazing sort of predictive power of just an algorithm or a piece of maths. An interesting follow-up from that was there was a father in the United States who got a letter saying your 15-year-old daughter, giving him a voucher for his 15-year-old daughter of baby clothes. Target had assumed she was pregnant from her behavior, but she was only 15. He thought he had a $10 million lawsuit. Of course, he went into Target with the lawyer, only to find out a couple of weeks later that his daughter was indeed pregnant. This stuff's getting pretty good. You're using it all the time. Every time you search in Google, a massive amount of algorithmic power is being applied to every single search. Amazon, whenever you do those recommendation engines, about 1/3 of their sales comes from that very subtle. It not only knows what books you looked at last time, it knows exactly how long you looked at those things that you didn't buy last time, and is very cleverly trying to work out what it's going to sell you next. Facebook, of course, ads are all algorithm-driven, and increasingly, eHarmony, Match.com are using algorithms to predict whether the people you date will result in a long-term relationship or not. This is getting very smart. Do you think predictive analytics are not going to hit education? They already have. They already have in Google. I've just shown you that. But it will hit software in a big way, because the results are starting to come through from the early trials here. So imagine you have a PC, you're doing some learning online on your PC, and you have this sort of sat-nav, behind the scenes, as it were, which is a set of algorithms that starts to know you personally, what you know, what you don't know, where you're going, what you do next. And it acts like a sat-nav in your car in the sense that whenever you go off piste, it gets you back on piste again. This is personalized learning to the nth degree, something no teacher can do. I've been a teacher. With 32 kids in a room, you have no chance of giving personalized feedback. In a lecture in the university, I've done plenty of them, zero feedback. What you need is software that's algorithm-driven, that really knows every individual and how they should be progressing in their learning, and that's coming of age. And this is some of the early data from the States showing that it not only prevents dropouts, or what the Americans would call withdrawals, but pass rates as well, a doubling of effect in that study. Now, in higher education, that's the one that's changed the least. We all know that lectures are still the main pedagogic procedure, as it were, there. I was in Bologna 2 weeks ago, and I visited Bologna University, and this is Bologna University in 1340, the first university in Europe. Okay, and here's the lecture up in the top left-hand side here with the book and the lectern, exactly the same sort of thing you'd see today with serried ranks in a lecture hall. But look a little bit more carefully at this image, because this guy over here is absolutely fast asleep. Not unusual if you've attended some of the lectures I've attended in both a UK and an American university, Ivy League or not. But look at all these people here. The artist absolutely captured it perfectly. None of them are paying attention. Absolutely none of them. This was 1340, before books. So we have to, nothing's new in this notion that things have gone wrong here. Of course, the big news is that over the last 2 to 3 years, that these massive open online courses have hit the market. Free. I've taken 8 of these courses, and 4 of them have been better than all the courses I took at university. And I went to 2 universities, went right through the whole PhD process. They've been absolutely fantastic. This is an interesting phenomenon because MOOCs are all these aggregated MOOCs. All that stuff I've been showing you, the MOOC people are bringing them together, packaging them up in courses, and giving you free courses, especially coding, business courses, vocational courses. We've never really had this before on the web. And if you want to know how this stuff tends to aggregate, I highly recommend this book on the nature of technology by William Arthur, small aside. But what's happening on MOOCs? Well, this is really pent-up demand. Who are these 10 million people who are taking these courses? Where did they come from? The universities weren't supplying that service before. Nobody was. These are people like me, adult lifelong learners. Learning doesn't stop when you finish college. The brain doesn't sort of shut down and then that's it. We go on with a thirst to learn, and that's what this demand is creating and need. Now, it's not going to replace universities. That's not the threat here. Definitely not. In fact, it's got nothing to do with 18-year-old undergraduates. It's got everything to do with people beyond college, the lifelong learners, people who have work, people who have kids, an older group, a much wider spread of ages. And the sort of things that are starting to happen now are those people who are in work and who are just learning for the sake of learning, but they may be doing a lot of MOOCs for computer science, a lot of business, a lot in STEM subjects, science, mathematics, engineering. It's not really the sort of liberal arts end of the spectrum that's thriving in this world. Another interesting, employer reaction to this has been quite positive as well. It will not be long before employers start accepting MOOCs on CVs. I would be, I'm really interested. I'm a business guy by background. I've employed lots of coders. I would much rather have a kid who's learned on his own and shown the perseverance to get through a course on his own than somebody who's just turned up to college. I don't think there's anything wrong with looking at this stuff as a form of accreditation. And then a charge that's often put against these courses that you get catastrophic dropout. I don't think this is a problem at all. I'm just amazed that 10 million people have dropped in. It's got nothing to do with dropout. And of course we drop out. You can sign up for one of these courses in a minute. There's no big commitment. You're not moving to another city spending $10,000. I drop out of books. I don't finish every book I start. I've even walked out of movies. Finishing is a rational thing if the course is not quite right for you. So I don't think we should be too worried about that necessarily. I think it's actually a category mistake. People talk about university dropouts, college dropouts. Take that concept and apply it to MOOCs, but that's just a mistake, a linguistic mistake, taking something that applies in one area and applying it to another. And then another charge that's often put towards MOOCs is they're poor pedagogically, and they are not. Take a JavaScript MOOC. look at the detailed feedback you get as you code. It's an extremely sophisticated experience in all sorts of subjects, but try it, suck it and see, as it were, because there are all sorts of aspects of pedagogy that are quite exciting in that world. I think another thing that's going to change, and has already, is assessment using computers, because we've all sat in the exams and had those tests at the end of every year we attended school, and this would be a typical question on Pythagoras' theorem: find x, 4 centimeters, 3 centimeters. If you know Pythagoras' theorem, you can work out x, which is 5, or you may just know 3, 4, 5. But I love the answer that this kid gave to this question. Find x, here it is. Now, I would employ this kid in a jiff. You know, I don't really care if most of the people I employed know Pythagoras' theorem, because I'm 57 years old and I have never used it. I do care that someone has the smarts, the humor, the lateral thinking to come up with that sort of answer. And notice what the teacher's done in a red pen: x0. No judgment. I think I've been given that a big tick and put 10. You know, these are the people we need in the future. These are the people that are attending this conference: creative, bright people, not people who just know how to mechanically do basic maths. Another one which is coming quickly to the fore here, which most of education forgets and has ignored, and it came from actually a Berliner, Ebbinghaus, who studied here in Berlin. Ebbinghaus, that great hero of psychology of learning, who's really the guy who brought the scientific method into memory theory. And he gave us a great legacy in 1885. He said, you forget almost everything you learn. It was an amazing thing at the time. You go to school, you go to college, you forget it all. You will forget everything I've just said before you hit your car or the U-Bahn tonight. You will forget almost everything. That's science, folks. That's the truth. So how do we stop that? How do we stop that? Well, we know how to stop that. You give spaced practice. You have to go back. You should be taking notes. You should be looking at that notes further on, so on and so forth. There are all sorts of ways to prevent that leakage, that forgetting, but we don't do anything about it. You have to raise over time and review material if you're going to learn everything. Practice, practice, practice. How do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. So what can technology do about this? Well, we have a wonderful thing in all of our pockets now. Many of you got them in your hands, and that's the mobile phone. Now, people think that the mobile phone might be useful for learning and putting courses on their mobile phone. I don't know about you. I have never, ever seen anybody sit and do a course on a mobile phone. I'm not going to do one. It's completely the wrong medium for it. But there is something that mobile phones might be useful at. That is spaced practice. You've got something powerful, personal, portable, and bits of software are coming out, and this is one. What it does is it takes the cues from any learning experience you've had. Let's say it was a lecture or this talk. It creates those cues and delivers them on an hour, 1 day, 1 week, 1 month afterwards, so that it gradually moves stuff from short to long-term memory. Now, this is giving huge increases in the productivity in learning. Why haven't we been doing this all these years? It's bizarre. Ebbinghaus told us the problem. We never came up with any solutions. We now have a solution that may just solve that problem. On top of that, we've got wearables coming along, things that we will actually have to do that reinforcement of learning, to deliver learning in the field. And I like this as well, this thing called Spritz, because I think the way in which we actually read material, not only in ebooks and Kindles and so on, but if you're going to have something on a watch or on a small screen of Google Glass, it ain't going to be screeds of Wikipedia text. But I want you to look at just the red letter up here. I know this is in English, so it might not work as well for you as it does for me. But what you can do by delivering a word at a time with this center text, it's not actually dead center, it's off to the left, you notice. These guys have discovered that that's the optimal position for speed reading, is that you can double and triple the rate at which you read. Now, this is interesting because you must also, of course, have increased comprehension as well. But this is already going to be included in the second version of the Galaxy Gear Watch, and you will see technology come to the fore in all sorts of ways, unimaginable ways that we haven't seen before. And then I'm going to end on something which blew my mind recently. And I've been in this industry for a long time, and I spent 2 years in the games industry. And I'm used to gaming in first-person shooters, but first-person thinkers, I never really saw one in any of the headsets I'd been wearing all those years. Then along came this. And this is the Oculus Rift. Facebook have just bought the Oculus Rift for $2 billion. $2 billion. Why do you think they bought this? Well, Mark Zuckerberg, in his press release, gave us a clue. And he didn't mention gaming in the press release. He mentioned education. He said, this is what should be in the classroom. This is what kids should be using to learn by doing, as opposed to Pythagoras' theorem. And let me show you what I mean by this. I mean, you wear... Just like this. And when you enter this Oculus world, you really are in this world. I mean you. Yeah. You can hold it for me. No, don't worry, yeah. I think everybody gets the point. The real point here is that presence, when you climb inside this, you really are inside that world. It's not like a movie, it's even better than a movie. So the first raft of games that came out were horror games like Paranormal. And believe me, it will scare you shitless going into one of these games. It is absolutely terrifying. That's the first thing that will come out. But I was more interested in the educational applications of the Oculus. So let's see what some of those are. And this is just taking some very primitive, sort of basic... Hold on. Oh, hold on. The video's gone. There was a video here. Let me just, while that's happening, explain why this could be important. On presence, when your reptile brain tells you that you really are in another place, there are a couple of technical things you have to solve. You have to widen the scope so that it covers peripheral vision. That's about 80 to 90 degrees. They've already done that. You then have to have tracking on your head because you're in a 3D model. So the position of your head in relation to that model has to be real. So when you look up, you should be looking up. When you look down, you look down. They have just solved that. The newer version of the Oculus in July will have rock-solid tracking to get rid of motion sickness. Then there's high definition. This will be photorealistic, like your HD on your TV. So you will be entering a world that looks real. You'll be able to look around, backwards, up, round. You can even get a pedestal now which allows you to walk around and even run in these worlds. So how are we going to use that in education? Well, we already know in UK, vocational education is truly and magnificently awful. We've abandoned apprenticeships. Luckily, Germany has retained a good deal of those virtuous types of learning. But in Europe in general, we're learning that we're going to have to do more of this. And people can actually climb into other worlds. The demos that, if I get this video showing what I mean, allow you to go into space. In a spacesuit, fly around the space station, learn Newton's 3 laws by actually experiencing them. When you do press that little button on your spacesuit and your rocket pack and go forward, that is F equals negative F. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. When you're standing there, floating around the space station, and it's going at 17,000 miles per hour, and so are you, then that's the way to teach a kid about what orbits are and the fact that it's not actually zero gravity. Gravity does exist up there. All those misconceptions that people have in basic physics can be done beautifully when you enter that world. Or you can go down to the microatomic level and explore atoms, walk across the bottom of the ocean, which I've done. You can manipulate circuit boards. There are dozens of things that one can experience for real. And remember this is not just about experiencing the real world in a virtual world. The virtual world can be even better. I've flown across an EasyJet to Berlin today, and I wouldn't have got on that plane if my pilot hadn't gone through 300 hours of simulated training. Why? Because the simulator is better than real life. You can die on the simulator, you can't die in real life. It's cheaper, it's faster, and it's better. Is it working? All right, sorry. I do have a stick, yeah. I did have a stick. Actually, it's on the small one. There we are. So I think, to talk about this last slide here, everything I've mentioned here has been like a diode. It's a one-way phenomenon. Over the last 20 years, we've had all sorts of subtle impacts of technology and learning which have changed all of our behaviors forever. Don't imagine that none of us have been affected by this. This is only accelerating. And it's a feature of the Napsterization of learning. Really, this happened in the music industry, it happened in the film industry, it's happening in every other area of endeavor, travel, commerce, banking, and it will happen in education and health. It's just that in education, the rock-solid existing budgeting and structural phenomena, which is largely buildings, remember that the occupancy rate of an average university is less than 25%. Most of the rooms are empty most of the time. It's one of the most wasteful uses of buildings and real estate on the planet. So we must get over this idea that we only learn in buildings. We only learn face-to-face. We know that that's not true. The virtual world is as good, if not often better. Now, if I do have some time, I brought the Oculus Rift, and if we can find a corner somewhere, I'm going to set it up and let you experience this for real, if you wish. But, hey, my video's up. This is somebody who's just in a mall, and we're putting them on the Oculus Rift on, and we're putting them on a roller coaster, and the guy behind them gives him a little nudge to show you how visceral this is. I mean, it really freaks out. And that's not put on, that's for real. This is a space station, so my visor helmet is going up here. I'm floating around this thing. It's about the size of a major aircraft. You can see the solar panels coming across. I've got control, of course, over my jetpack, so I can move to the right or left and look around the thing. As I say, this is going at 17,000 miles an hour, so if you do start to want to teach some of those things in physics that I mentioned, you can do it perfectly well. I've been doing this with young kids. They absolutely adore it. You try learning Newton's 3 laws from a page on paper. You've all been through that experience. It's devilishly difficult, and you often don't get the basic gutsy feel for the physics. You just remember the formula and the maths. But you can see there's the planet Earth. This is stereoscopic, of course. In the Oculus, it appears as one image. You see those little things going off from my jetpack here. That's how you'd be teaching that a force has an equal and opposite reaction. You're round to the Earth, onto these solar panels. Remember, this thing goes around the Earth about 10.5 times a day. And those solar panels get dark, so they have to gather the light, store it in a battery, because it's in darkness for most of the time. All sorts of things you can learn. And here I am on the bottom of the ocean. I'm going forward here, and there's a humpback whale. You can see this shark up here if you were teaching the food chain in biology or geography or geology. And I'm walking forward. I can see the humpback whales, about 80,000 of those. They travel about 16,000 miles a year from the polar region up to breed in tropical regions. I can go over the edge here. And remember, there's a shark hovering about, so I've got to watch out for that baby. And then I'm going towards a hypothermal flume here, which is shooting out water at 400 degrees centigrade. You can teach that sort of stuff by actually going next to it, a thing you couldn't do in real life. It's a bit dark here, unfortunately, but if you can see what's happening here, there is actually a shark. Sorry, the lights are flooding this one out. But that was a shark who just ate me, if you saw that properly. Here, I was teaching history of the French Revolution using a guillotine. So remember, I've got the Oculus, it's my head that's going to fall into that basket at the bottom here. So 1792, hundreds of people were killed. If you're going to teach the French Revolution, guys, this is a way to do it. That's my basket. The crowd are baying for my aristocratic blood. I'll look up at the guillotine. There it goes. Boom. My head's now in the basket, and I'm looking back up at my neck, effectively. Now, the amazing thing about these experiences is that you never forget them. I know that if I show this to a kid when they're 9, they will never forget it for the rest of their life because it's deep processing. It's episodic memory. It's not bookish stuff from the page. We know people forget that. It's the way memory works. And this one's on a more prosaic, practical issue with circuit boards, where I'm putting LEDs on. I can build circuits. I can do all sorts of sophisticated things with this stuff. Anyway, I'm sure I've run out of time now anyway. So thank you very much for listening. I hope I've excited you about some of the possibilities that are coming along and maybe your kids will appreciate and use in the future. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Donald Clark.